you talk in your material about unconditional permission to eat. So, what does that mean?
Yeah. Speaking of opening a can of worms, right? um, Unconditional permission to eat is letting yourself be able to eat any and all foods
Hmm.
for any and all reasons at any and all times. And I think when people hear that, a lot of times they're like, oh my gosh, you're telling me to eat cookies all day long and I'm going to feel sick. Well, you can eat cookies all day long until you feel sick if you'd like to, but you also have the permission not to do that. Like you can choose something that feels good in your body, that honors your body and
Right.
also is like life-giving.
Welcome to the Natural Health Matters podcast, where it's all about maximizing your health potential so that you can look and feel your best at any age. I'm your host, David Sandstrom, naturopathic doctor and biblical health coach, and this is episode number 95. Today we have on the show Shelly Najjar. Shelly is a nutrition mindset coach. She blends mindset and practical tips to make it easier to develop a healthy, stress-free relationship with food. Shelly, welcome to Natural Health Matters.
Thanks, David.
It's great to have you. You know, I really resonate with a lot of your message about the freedom that we should be experiencing when we eat food. And I know that you are a licensed dietitian. That's correct, right?
Yes.
So what motivated you to get into this field? Was there an event in your life, or did you were always interested in nutrition? Tell me about your background story.
I wasn't always interested in nutrition. That got started in eighth grade in a science fair project. I just loved how it was connected to every other part of our lives. It was the first time I had really learned about nutrition, science of nutrition. So that got me started. But what got me into intuitive eating, which is the specialty that I do now, is really a hospital experience, not as a patient, but as a dietitian right out of school. And I think that was impactful because I saw a lot of people who felt like they had to give up on their lives because of their diagnosis or because of the recommendations that we were giving them that weren't super helpful. We were setting them up for failure, not intentionally, not because we were like evil dietitians or anything, just because that's the mainstream, right? Like we restrict everybody's food and then we tell them like, you should be happy because now you're going to be healthier. And none of those are guaranteed. And so
Right.
now people just really upset and feel like they either have to get, marked as non-compliant or give up on their health or be miserable in order to be healthy.
Yeah.
And I didn't like that feeling. I didn't like that feeling when I ended up with some health conditions that, had some nutrition components to that. And so I was struggling with that. And then I found out that health is more attainable with fewer food restrictions. And that kind of opened up it's a whole different way of doing things. And it
Yeah.
resonated with me a lot more.
So that happened, that revelation happened after you graduated from school. Is that correct?
Yes. So I had
Yeah.
gone through all the training to be a dietitian. I am a dietitian. I'm just practicing in a different way than is traditionally taught in
Yeah.
school.
Yeah. Well, you know, the same thing happened with me. I went to school to become a certified nutritional counselor and a naturopathic doctor, but I had to do some learning on my own after I got those credentials to really help people, honestly, because human beings are more than just a body. We are a spirit, we have a mind, and we live in a body. And if you really want to maximize your health potential, it's my contention that we have to address all three components to a human being. We can't afford to ignore any of it. And that's why I really love the way you blend mindset with your healthy eating. So I know one of the foundational principles that you go over with a new client is establishing the right relationship with food. So could you talk about that just a little bit?
Yeah. So I think in a previous podcast episode of yours, you had somebody on who was talking about mindset, and you were talking about how that has to come first. Like it's so impactful in everything else that we do. And I agree.
Yes.
I think that without thinking right, we can't approach food in a way that is healthy because the way that we are approaching, like the things that we're thinking about it, are off, right? And like I love Philippians. I think it's like 4:8 or something, where it talks about like what is true, what is good, what is noble. Like that's such a great filter for the mindset piece of it. Like if you are convinced that, certain foods make you a worse person or instantly make you less healthy, or, you're going to have to make up for them later on, things like that. Like,
Right.
those are incorrect statements, those are lies,
Right.
and they just get hooked in our brain, and then they impact the way that we think about our food, the way that we're interacting with our food. It causes a lot of stress in our bodies. Stress impacts our digestion. You can create problems that weren't there. Like, you can create an intolerance that isn't actually like a biological intolerance, just because we're stressing so much about that particular food
Yeah.
that it becomes a problem. Like, our
Yeah.
thinking is the problem. It's not the food.
Well,
Yeah.
with this topic, you're really opening up a can of worms here, aren't you? Because
Yeah, for sure.
there is a major roadblock to people changing the traditional narrative they've heard about food, and making that mind shift is no small step. I can appreciate how difficult that is to communicate that message. So I want to give you the time and the space today to really do that well, because I know that's challenging, because there's usually decades worth of dogma that people need to rethink, and to develop a healthier, more balanced approach to eating. So I really like this. This is good stuff. So you talk in your material about unconditional permission to eat. So what does that mean?
Yeah. Speaking of opening a can of worms, right? um, Unconditional permission to eat is is letting yourself be able to eat any and all foods
Hmm.
for any and all reasons at any and all times. And I think when people hear that, a lot of times they're like, oh my gosh, you're telling me to eat cookies all day long and I'm going to feel sick. Well, you can eat cookies all day long until you feel sick if you'd like to, but you also have the permission not to do that. Like, you can choose something that feels good in your body, that honors your body, and
Right.
also is like life giving. We're not saying you can't have cookies or you can only have cookies up to a certain point. Like, some people are like, oh, you can have moderation of anything, but then we're not really moderating like carrots. You can only have so many carrots. No, we're just moderating like cookies or chocolate or something like that.
Right.
Like, no, we
And
don't
you're not a
need
bad
that.
person if you had a chocolate chip
No, you're
cookie.
not a bad person. It has no moral statement about you,
Right.
whether you ate that cookie or not.
Yeah.
And I think that's a really, like, it can be really freeing when we understand that, but it's also so hard. It's such a barrier for people to understand that and to live
Yeah.
that out, because it feels so, like, we get really defensive about that. Like, how can
Right.
that be? Yeah.
Right. Well, I want to point out a couple of things, because it could be some misunderstanding here. Shelley's not saying you can eat anything you want, anytime you want, and as much quantity as you want. She's not saying that. I believe, now correct me if I'm wrong, Shelley, but what I'm hearing you say is that we need to develop a healthier relationship with food, and not buy into some of the dogma that most people are perpetuating. Things like, oh my goodness, if you eat ice cream, it's going to go directly. You may as well just slab it onto your thigh, because that's where it's going to end up. Well, that's not necessarily true, right? We need to step back a little bit, take a deep breath, and say, all right, wait a minute. Does that make sense? Is what this person's saying make sense? And you brought up another point about freedom, and the verse that's coming to mind is Genesis 2:16, and it says, "From any tree of the garden you may eat freely." God didn't say, well, you can eat that fruit, but only if it's less than 2,000 calories a day. He didn't say that. He said, you may eat freely. This is the original design for our relationship with food. And then we see in the New Testament, 1 Corinthians 6:12, all things are lawful for me, but not all things are profitable. All things are lawful for me, but I will not be mastered by anything. So we're the ones in charge, right? And we're supposed to be able to make good choices, use our free will to make well-informed choices that are beneficial to our health. Are we? Am I summarizing pretty good there, or do you want to fill in some gaps?
Yeah. Let me clarify some points. I love what you said about, this is the original design, because we are going back to the way that we were created to eat and to know how to eat, right? We don't know,
Mm-hmm.
like, as we're born, we don't know all the nutrition science pieces of this. And I'm not talking about, well, we need to go back to saying, like, we don't know, we stick anything in our mouths, and like that's dangerous, right? Like if you stick, say, like, I mean, just ridiculous. Like if you stick a scorpion in your mouth, you're going to have some problems.
Yep.
Um, so what I'm saying is we're going back to those internal cues instead of the external rules, because the external rules are added to us, right? After, oh, you can't have that much. Oh, you have to clean your plate. Oh, you um, you ate that much. Are you sure you want that? Or, oh, I was so bad. I had this cake all weekend. We had this birthday party and I just kind of blew it. Or I'll start over on Monday. Any of
Mm-hmm.
those are not right thinking,
Yeah,
and
and not useful.
not useful. They're not helpful. They're not building up. Right? There's other
Mm-hmm.
verses that talk about we're gonna do things for building up. Those aren't building up. Those are tearing down. Those are breaking apart.
Right.
And when you look at the conflict that dieting causes, or the conflict that these rules cause, like it's so great. And so what we're doing is we're bringing back peace, we're bringing back freedom, we're bringing back joy, like enjoyment of your life, enjoyment of the foods, these good gifts that we have. That they were, we're talking about Genesis, like they saw it, and they could eat anything that was like freely, and not like just the idea of, we were driven by like the visuals, we were driven by our bodies. That's what we want to bring back to, not like, oh, we do anything that our body says, right? Because I think it has to be balanced.
Right.
And I teach a way of learning that balance, but not to the point where you have to say, oh, I can't have anything. No, you can have anything, right? Just like that other verse was talking
Mm-hmm.
about, you can have anything. I'm not saying that it's all going to feel the same in your body, or that it's going to do the same thing in your body. I'm saying that we have to start with that permission, because otherwise, when we add this knowledge that God has given us about the science, about the things that he's put into our lives, it's just going to become another external rule, because
Yes.
the devil loves to twist things, right? Loves to twist truth. And we can take like, oh, wow, fruits and vegetables are so good for us. They're so healthy. We know that they are associated with less disease risk when we eat more fruits and vegetables and we eat more variety. And that's really great, as long as you have that foundational knowledge and the mindset to accept that in a neutral way, and to say like, yeah, and neutrally, if I decide not to eat fruits and vegetables one day, it doesn't make me a bad person. It doesn't make me a bad Christian. It doesn't make me like this terrible, eater that I just can't eat fruits and vegetables that day, and the rest of my life is ruined. I'm going to get every disease in the, like, that's not
Right.
how that happens,
Right.
right? So how do we set the groundwork in our mindset so that we can take in the truths about nutrition science
Mm-hmm.
and apply it to our lives in a way that is freeing and not just another rule?
Yeah, yeah. I really like that self-condemnation piece that you just touched on. When I did my practice, I'd, set somebody up with an eating plan, and I'd see them a couple weeks later, and I'd say, well, how'd you do? Well, we met on Thursday, and Saturday night we had the office party, and I had drinks and I had cake, and I totally fell off the wagon. So I didn't do anything. Like, well, okay, you had one bad day, but what about the rest of the 13 days between then and now? And they just beat themselves up so bad that they couldn't get back on the horse, and just go back to the healthy eating. So self love and you're right, sense of identity is really huge here. We have to be on guard for this condemnation that's going to come our way, from false beliefs that we hold, and false beliefs that other people hold, that they will attack us with. Frankly, that goes on quite a bit. So you talk about eating with attunement. So could you dive into that a little bit?
Yeah. So a lot of times people hear intuitive eating and they think it's like a spiritual like connection to something that is going to just tell you exactly what to eat. Like, oh, you just tune in and then you like, I visualize this food and that's what I want to eat. Like,
Yeah,
that's
may the
not,
force be with you, kind of
yeah,
thing. Yeah.
exactly. Yeah. It's like, ooh, magic. And so what I really am talking more about is this sense of attunement, or aligning. I usually say aligning your tongue, your body, and your brain
Mhm.
so that we can eat with that attunement. So attunement is tuning in and like putting your attention somewhere that has information, right? So we're tuning into like this show. We're tuning into the car dials on our car, and they give us information, right? And so we're looking at that and we're using that information neutrally to inform our decisions. And our decision making, it can be all over the place, like any other topic, right? Our decision making in anything, not just nutrition, can be everywhere. And we use to make informed decisions, which is a phrase you used earlier, and I love that. To make informed decisions, we need that information.
Yes.
So I teach people how to tune into the information that can be helpful, not
Yeah.
just for eating in a way that like research says is good, but eating in a way that research says is good for the population, bringing that back into how do we mesh that with the individual preferences and the individual situation.
Okay.
That's what
So
I would say is attunement.
So, what would you say to someone who said, "Okay, I hear you, but my attunement is I really love donuts and coffee in the morning. I like swinging by. The world runs on Dunkin', and and that's what I enjoy in the morning. So, since I enjoy it, is that something I should dive deeper into, or what would you say to that?"
That's such an interesting one. It comes up so much. Not Dunkin'. I'm a Pacific Northwester, so we
Okay,
have more Starbucks here than
I
Dunkin's.
got you.
But it does come up so often that people will say, well, if I only had unconditional permission to eat this food, then I would eat it like, no, I would eat it unendingly, right? And I would just
Yeah,
keep going.
right.
The reason that's happening, well, it could be many reasons. One of the most common reasons I see is because you don't have that permission to eat it. Because it's like if I told you right now, do not think about the purple elephant. Just don't do it. It's not part of this rules here. We're not thinking about purple elephants, okay? What did you just think about?
I can't get Dumbo out of my mind.
Exactly, purple Dumbo, right?
Purple Dumbo.
So, were you thinking about purple Dumbo prior to this?
No.
But I just created a situation where, in order to do what I asked you to do, even if you were like, "Yeah," she means, "Well, like we're just gonna see how this goes. This is fun, right? I want to see," but you couldn't get it out of your head. In order to do what I asked you, you would have had to put out energy to do it. Or I set you up for failure. Like that's the only options here. We do the same thing with our food. So if we're saying like, oh, this is the thing that I want, donuts and coffee, and I just want that every day. Okay. If we're saying that that's not a good start for your day, you need to eat something different, feel bad about that. That's your only good thing that you're able to do. Like that's the only tasty thing that you're going to be able to do all day long because you already used up all your points or whatever it is. How are you going to feel about that donuts and coffee? How is that going to make you feel after you eat it? How are you going to feel when you're thinking about getting it, when you want to get it, when you think about eating healthy because no air quotes, that it's going to make you give up your donuts and coffee or somebody's going to make you feel bad about it? And if you say, like, I can't have it, like, oh, I'm just going to quit. Okay, that might go as well as your self-discipline and willpower goes until it
Hmm.
runs out. And then we're in the Dumbo situation, right?
Right. Yeah. Very good. Well, I think that what we're talking about here is a more holistic approach to eating, and that is tuning in to our bodies. I believe our bodies are constantly speaking to us. I mean, no one would disagree that our bodies tell us when we're warm or cold, or when we're sweaty, we need a shower, and when we smell, there's things that our bodies are always telling us, and I think we need to tune in to our body's secondary language, and that is how we feel before and after a meal. Now, do you have specifics as to what you teach your clients to look for, or is there a roadmap that you use with them, or anything along those lines?
Yeah, I have some tools that I use on a regular basis. One of them is called interoception, which is something that I can teach like in a couple of seconds. So one of the ideas of this, like you already know how to do interoception. Interoception is the noticing and like the awareness of what's going on internally to your body.
Hmm.
So, for example, if you need to pee, you have some interoception skills. Like if you are able to tell when you need to pee, you have some interoception skills. If you know but you ignore it constantly, that means that you have an opportunity to reinforce those interoception skills. And the reason that's so important is because it's transferable. So hunger and fullness, sensing how you're feeling after you're eating, sensing what the food's doing, like how it's affecting you. Did it give you a lot of gas? Did it, make you get a lot of energy? Those kinds of things.
Yeah.
That's all interoception.
Mm-hmm.
And we can grow that. There's research that shows we can grow that in one area. For example, like being able to pay attention to our need to go to the bathroom, being able to, there's a heartbeat activity, which is evidence-based for learning how to do interoception. And these kinds of activities are really helpful in growing the skill of interoception, which means you could be able to sense even the food stuff easier. And so what that is really just like, hey, if you need to go to the bathroom, like notice that, take the time to notice that, take the time to check in. Like we're just sitting on our computers all day long or doing whatever work you're doing. You're really busy, on the weekend, you're going from activity to activity. And then like, oh, I really need to pee, right? Like people are like, oh, I really need to pee. Okay,
Yeah.
how did it get that far? Because our bodies put out signals as it gets going. We have stretch receptors in our bladders that are telling us gradually before it's
Mm-hmm.
like sudden switch on, right? Like,
Emergency. Yeah.
yeah, that's not how that normally happens. But we get so used to ignoring those signals that we can sometimes only notice the big ones because our body will sometimes be like, well, those aren't getting paid attention to. Let me turn those down a little bit because
Yeah.
that's a waste of energy.
Right.
And our body's really good at conserving energy. So
Mm-hmm.
to build that up, like one of the skills that I teach people is actually like, hey, pay attention to your body. When it tells you it's cold or it needs to pee or I'm uncomfortable, let me shift position. Any of those kinds of things, like we're gonna start paying attention, we're gonna start reinforcing those signals so that our body keeps putting them out, right? And that we learn
Yeah.
how to do that tuning in, responding, tuning in, responding.
Yeah, that makes perfect sense to me. When I was studying naturopathy, I said, there's a lot of parallels between what the Bible teaches about how we're supposed to live our lives and a naturopathic approach to health. For instance, the first tenet is do no harm. First, do no harm. And of course, the Bible teaches that our bodies are a temple of the Holy Spirit and therefore sacred, and we shouldn't harm them, right? So that's a good place to start. So I tell people that when it comes to food, we should seek out food as close to its God-given natural form as possible, because God's design is always best. The more man gets his hands on our food supply, the less healthy it becomes for us. If it's in a box or a package, it's suspect. You've got, people talk about, teach whole courses on reading ingredients. Well, it's not so difficult to read the ingredients on a head of broccoli, right? We know what's in there. It's broccoli. So we don't have to worry about the FDA approving certain terms for a whole host of chemicals and things like that if we're just eating single ingredient food the way God designed. That's a great place to start. And then you mentioned, how was your hunger and your sweet cravings after a meal? I think that's a good indicator as well. If you eat a meal and an hour later you're standing in front of the refrigerator looking for a snack, well, that meal didn't satisfy you. Your satiety was not, satiated. So you missed something. Your body's telling there's something missing in that last meal that we had. So that's another really, really good indicator. And you mentioned it as well. Do you feel jittery, or how's your energy level after a meal? Some people just take it for granted that after lunch, I'm doing the head bob. I needed something to pick me up. I need an energy shot, or I need a venti, to keep me going. That might be ordinary, but it's not normal. That's not part of our design. We're supposed to be uplifted after a meal. And think about it. Wouldn't God make it that way, that we would seek out the foods that make us feel good and avoid the foods that make us feel like garbage? I mean, it really sounds almost insultingly basic, but things have gotten so convoluted in the diet industry and the food industry these days that we need to get back to the basics, don't we?
Yeah, there's a lot of money, like billions of dollars of money that goes into making us feel bad about our food, bad about our bodies,
Mm-hmm.
confused. I
Yeah.
think that that's one of the major things that people use. So like it's confusing everywhere, so you need to use my new confusing system in order to achieve XYZ. And it's
Right.
like, or not, right?
Yeah. Right. I tell people, if someone says, "Hey, look, it's been difficult. But after decades of research, we've done it. We've found the perfect human diet. All you've got to do is spend $99.99 on my course or my book
Per
or my
month.
program per
Yeah.
month, and you too can have the life you want. You know, it's silly. It really is, because we're all individuals and we all need to make those choices based on how we as individuals feel and what's in alignment or in attunement with our spirit, soul, and body. You know, what's going to make us better human beings and what's going to drag us down and be a ball and chain. That's an individual thing.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's so freeing when we realize that it doesn't have to be the way that everybody is making it a big deal to be, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah, that can be a
Yeah.
relaxing, life-giving opportunity.
Yeah. Absolutely. So, what else are some of the highlights of things you share with your clients that the Natural Nation should be aware of today? What's some of the low hanging fruit that you find
Yeah,
yourself
yeah.
sharing over and over with your clients? I'm sure there's got
I
to
was
be
going to
some
say one of the
things.
most common phrases that I say is probably, what is the most nourishing thing that you can do right now for you? And the way that I usually phrase it is a question to ask yourself. So it would usually have I statements in there. So it would be, what is the most nourishing thing that I can do for me right now? And I find that that one is really helpful, whether we're tuning into our body signals, whether considering, like, do I need to spend more time with God? Do I need to get up and move around? Are there people that I need to connect with? What is it? Because like you're talking about, like, it's a whole life approach, right? It's not
Hmm.
just what we're eating or how we're thinking about what we're eating, because sometimes when we realize we're digging into the mindset, we're asking food to do way more than it's ever supposed to do,
Yeah.
right? Food is supposed to nourish us. It brings us connection, but connection with what? Not the food. It brings us connection with other people. It's
Yes.
part of the social experience. It's part of the emotional. Like, yes, it can be a coping tool. If it's your only coping tool, there's going to be some issues, right? Like,
Right.
we want to help people have a fulfilling life, like in general, right? Not
Yeah.
just in one area. So
Right.
that question I find is so helpful in identifying, like, what do you need next? What might be calling for attention in your life, not just with your food, right? But any
Hmm.
area of your life. So again, that question's, what is the most nourishing thing I can do for me right now?
I like
And if
it.
that's,
I like that question. You know, what came to mind
yeah,
immediately when you said that was the story of the Jesus with the woman at the well. And the disciples
yeah,
went off to go get food. They were hungry. And Jesus said, I'm going to hang out here. And of course, he has the encounter with the woman and he reveals himself to her as the Messiah. And the disciples come back and they say, aren't you hungry? And he says, I have food you guys know nothing about.
mm-hmm,
And he was talking about spiritual nourishment. And that, that is a whole another topic, probably best suited for another whole podcast. But just in a nutshell, we have a hierarchy to a human being. We are a spirit, we have a mind, we live in a body, and by design our spirit is to be connected with the spirit of God. And when we feed our spirit well, now we've set ourselves up for success, because our spirit will animate our minds, our thought lives, and our emotions in a healthy way. And it's our minds that animate our brains, and the brains run the body. So it all starts at a spiritual level. It translates into an emotional, mental, emotional level, and that ultimately manifests in the physical. And it works both ways. It's a bidirectional operation here. So yeah, there's a complex relationship between the three parts to a human being, and being intuitive and saying, what's the best thing I need right now? What's going to nourish me as a whole person the most right now? That could be fasting all day, right? Maybe the best thing for you to do right now is just abstain from food and drink nothing but water for the next 24 hours. That might be the thing you need right now. It's not all food's not always the answer, is it?
no, no. And I think, for fasting, one thing I would say is, like, I love it as a spiritual discipline.
Hmm.
As a dieting method, I am not a fan, right? And I think that sometimes we can get, especially Christians, we can, like, wrap that into, or again, twisting, right? The truth of that gets twisted and being like, oh, but you could do this as like a health plan. You're like, no, no, no. this purpose is not as a health plan. Like if there's any health benefits, it's side. But if we're doing this because we want to draw closer to God, because we want to show our dependency on God, because we're realizing that food is not the answer for everything, like, yes, then it's a great way to connect with God, to put our attention off of the earthly things, right? Putting our attention back on Jesus.
Yeah.
Guys, it's such a good experience.
Well, abstaining from food demonstrates a bit of humility. And the Bible says that God resists the proud, but gives grace to the humble. And I think that's one of the primary reasons why we should fast, is to demonstrate that humility and demonstrate the mastery over a legitimate need. Let's face it, we all need food. We need calories. You abstain from that for too long, you're not going to be around much longer, right? We're all in the same boat there. But yeah, I think the spiritual component to fasting is huge. There are some health benefits, but I would suggest, and I'm with you, that those are secondary. No, they come as side benefits. The autophagy and the cellular repair that goes on, detoxification, those things are all real. And you can support that in the medical literature quite easily. But first and foremost, supply your spirit with the nourishment it needs. That's huge.
Yeah.
So what else would you like to share, Shelley, before we wrap things up? Is there anything we haven't covered that you hope to cover today?
I guess as we're thinking about, I may say, where is this thought coming from?
Yeah.
That can be really helpful in figuring out, is this a helpful thought, or is this something that is maybe being used or misused in a way that is no longer helpful, is keeping me constrained, those kinds of things. So yeah, I think that and what is the most nourishing thing? Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. All right, real good. Shelley, if this message is resonating with someone and they'd like to work with you, what's the easiest way to get a hold of you?
And they can go to confidentnutritionnow.com, or they can email me, Shelley, that's SHELLY, @confidentnutritionnow.com.
Excellent. Shelley, thank you so much for being here and sharing your wisdom with the Natural Nation.
Thanks for having me.
For more, go to the show notes page at davidsandstrom.com/95. There you can find an audio as well as a video version of the podcast and a full downloadable transcript that you can put on any device and take with you and read wherever you want. If you're enjoying the show, would you tell a friend about it? The most common way someone finds a new podcast is a friend tells them about it. This information is relatively hard to find, so I sure would appreciate you spreading the word. It would help me out a lot. That's it for now. Thank you for listening. I'll talk with you next week. Be blessed.